I want to introduce my panelists here. Everyone knows General Clark. I don't know if you know that he also is involved in the wind industry, and we'll get into that a little bit. This is not Susan Riley. This is Anna Gianovetti. Anna is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Susan's right-hand person for public policy at RES, and has been very active in the Colorado battle on 252. I'm going to talk to her a little bit about that as well. And then we've heard from Michael Polsky already this conference. He's the CEO of Invenergy, does both gas and wind, and I'm going to talk to him a little bit about the wind-gas nexus. I have a couple of slides. I just only want to get to, I think I'll use that one as actually the slide for the day. Roan's shown the growth of solar. This has the same kind of hockey stick effect and very dependent, of course, on economics. If you want to get serious with utilities, you have to provide a competitive resource. And I think that's now certainly in place in the U.S. for wind. So you can see that we have about 60,000 megawatts installed currently in the U.S. I want to show the country that you see. Back when I got started in the domestic wind business in 2000, we really only had 4 states: Texas, Iowa, California, and Oregon, who really, Minnesota, who really were serious about wind. Now we have 34 states that are serious about wind. So we've come a long way in just 14 years, gone from 2,500 megawatts to 60,000 megawatts. Have about 4.5% of the U.S. electricity is generated by wind. But we have a big future ahead of us. And I want to ask the panelists some questions about that future. I found it rather interesting that on the page of our program, it has a quote by John Kennedy: "Those who only look to the past or present are certain to miss the future." But the key term there is only. We have to look to the past to understand the past in order to craft our future. So I want to talk a little bit about the past with Michael. Michael came from the gas industry, the IPP industry, got into the wind industry later, and now Invenergy, his company, is one of the leading wind developers in the country and here in Colorado as well. So Michael, I'm going to ask you the question about the past. We've gone to 2,500 megawatts to 60,000 megawatts today. We have 34 states that are serious about wind. What was it about the last 15 years that really brought about this tremendous growth in wind?
Well, I guess there were several factors. One, the key factor is renewable portfolio standards. I think I spoke here before that unfortunately we have a problem with access in markets with existing utilities, incumbents that not necessarily open to a new type of generation. So in order for wind, and I remember when I started wind in 2003, our first project was in Oklahoma, and we at that time we could make wind like 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So I went to Oklahoma Gas Electric saying, "We'll send the wind, it's cheaper than anything you have," and they said, "We're not going to buy it," which basically illustrates, a lot of people think, particularly people ask me, people think that you just build a wind farm and market is there, but it's not true. So the key is renewable portfolio standard that really required that certain amount of energy would come from renewable sources, and wind being probably the most widely distributed and the most competitive, at least in the past, play a major role in that. That's number one. Number two is the advancement in wind technology. We could see, again, I got into business in 2003, just for your information, that the diameter, the biggest diameter of the wind turbines at that time was 72 meters. It was sort of state of the art. Now you have turbines with 120-meter diameters, and wind production increases in cube to the diameter. So really turbines produce 2 to 2.5 times more electricity for a turbine, obviously with a bigger rotor, than before. So cost dropped. So in addition to RPS, a lot of utilities started buying wind just simply as a lowest cost resource, as a hedge to gas prices or or simply as just a lower cost alternative. So in my opinion, those were the two very major factors that really affected wind growth.
Thank you, Michael. Anna, let's talk about the present. You're very involved in state policies. States, as we've heard from other folks this week, we really can get stuff done in the states. It's really tough to get stuff sometimes done at the national level because of the political situation, but we can get stuff done in the states. As Michael said, the RPSs were really important. We recently had a big victory in Colorado with Senate Bill 252. Talk a little bit about today's sort of policy environment in Colorado and what that means for wind.
Well, I think the policy environment in Colorado is very supportive of renewable energy generally. And I think you've hit on a key point when you mentioned that there's an opportunity for the states to advance renewable energy policy in this country. Unfortunately, we have seen a bit of a logjam form in Congress, and that has definitely created some impediments to growth of the industry. But what I'm really excited about is finding new sources of demand for renewables, both at the state level and across the country. And I think that the EPA's carbon rules are a really important step in the right direction. And the states are going to have a big role to play in that because they're going to be responsible for what are called state implementation plans, or SIPs. So Michael spoke yesterday and reiterated today about the fact that there isn't necessarily natural demand for wind energy and for renewables. To some extent, it is a zero-sum game. Every megawatt hour that of conventional generation is going to be displaced and replaced with carbon-free generation. Every megawatt hour that is going to be produced from carbon-free generation is going to displace something from traditional generation. So there has to be an offset mechanism to compensate for that. I believe that appropriately valuing carbon in the marketplace is critical to making that transition possible. I believe that the EPA's carbon rules are a very significant step in the right direction. It's not a fait accompli by any means, but it's a big step in the right direction. And again, the states' implementation plans, how they choose at the state level to acknowledge or to the mechanisms that they approve for compliance with these carbon regulations will be a big factor in determining the amount of demand that there is for renewables. And so we're very actively encouraging them to embrace renewables and use renewables to the extent possible for compliance purposes.
So in Senate Bill 252 that was passed last year, a very contentious fight, basically requiring the large co-ops to do 20% of their generation in renewables. This was a big battle. In many states, the renewable portfolio standards exempt municipalities and co-ops and just sort of focus on the investor-owned utilities, which is the big dog, but it's not the whole picture. And one of the things I found curious in this battle of 252 was what was characterized as the rural-urban divide. And I was sort of taken back by that, because I always viewed this as an urban-rural partnership, because in the rural areas is where you build the wind. It's not like photovoltaics where you can put it in the city. It's out in the rural areas, and they get the jobs, they get the tax benefits, they get the lease payments, they get basically all the economic benefits of wind development. And it's the cities who have the demand for power, and they pay for that through the electricity rates. And so I see that as a partnership between rural and urban Colorado, and yet it was characterized, unfortunately, by the cooperative, and I'm not talking about Holy Cross here or DMEA, two very progressive cooperatives you guys are fortunate to have here in the valley, but the cooperatives in the Eastern Plains, which has all the wind, characterize this as a not considering rural interests. And it was really unfortunate that was characterized that way. General Clark, I want to turn to you, because you were associated and still are associated with one of the real visionaries of our country in community wind, a fellow by the name of Dan Jewell from Minnesota, who was quite a pioneer in developing small community-owned projects in Minnesota. And when there's a project that's owned by the community, not just hosted by the community, there's an economic development multiplier of 2 to 3 times for that local community. Talk to us a little bit about the challenge of implementing smaller community-owned projects.
I will, but I also want to say I was an advisor to Pattern Energy for 5 years and helped them get some big projects in the United States. And I'm also working with Blackstone and a company called Fistera. We're doing a lot of wind overseas. So, I've seen both sides of this. The advantage for the community wind is that it really it's an investment opportunity for local people. The biggest problem we've got in all of these renewables is financing. And when you get through, if you have the financing and if you could stand tall, you can actually stand up to most of the utility companies. But we don't have MLP financing authority in wind energy. If we had it, community wind would take off like gangbusters. As it is, community wind is still very, very important because it's a way that local people can, and we usually do a flip model, where if the farmer puts it on his land, he gets some fees for securing it, and then at the end of the PTC period, the ownership structure flips, and he ends up with his kid's college education spinning around outside his farmhouse. And it's an amazing good deal. So we've done this across the Midwest. One of the technical advantages of it is you can locate it near the grid without having to put so much into the grid that you have to pay a lot of money for the grid. So you can tie into a lot smaller nodes on the grid. And you would think that it would be better for the big utility companies because it distributes the uncertainty of wind across. Now, I testified in front of the Minnesota legislature and discovered I was one step above Judas Iscariot in advocating community wind. I didn't realize it was such an un-American concept, but for at least this person who was testifying on behalf of a big utility company, it was a major threat to their profit. I've never understood it, but I do believe that it is a way that you can package in an area where you don't have to have hundreds of acres, you've got farm owners, small farm owners, you've got distributed electric power. You can put in 2 megawatts or 5 megawatts in an area. It can be invested in by the community. It can revert to the community like we did with Woodstock, Minnesota. And all we're really lacking for this is greater appreciation by the utility companies. Can I continue here or am I using up too much time? So one of the things you find is utility companies, they like big things. So they like to talk to a big coal company. We're $1 billion utility. How much you got in coal? So we got $1 billion. Good, let's have our lawyers talk and we'll work this out. So you come in with your proposal to put 5 megawatts in Woodstock, Minnesota, and you go to Xcel Energy and they said, well, what kind of wind are you going to provide? Well, we're going to provide, electricity that comes out of wind. Well, what's the power level? Well, it's going to be 4 megawatts. Well, can you guarantee it? How do we know you're going to put it up? And you go through a year-long discussion with a corporate lawyer, and you got a little company there who's trying to do this without having access to high-powered $500, $700 an hour lawyers. And it's David and Goliath, really. So what we asked for from Minnesota was a standard contract for community wind. Just give us a form. I mean, every one of these things has to answer the same questions. Why do you want to create a brand new legal agreement? Because it slows down the process. And so what we need for community wind is we need standard legal agreements. We need MLP financing so that local people can put money in and it counts, the tax loss counts against ordinary income as opposed to against passive income. When it counts against passive income and you're an investor, unless you've got and own a couple of shopping malls that you can take right off your losses against those profits, you can't use that PTC. It doesn't help you. So there's a couple of things that need to be done. We've been advocating this for several years on the Hill. I know AWEA has helped us on this. We haven't had any progress because the people that write the tax laws say that this is exactly the same as Section 8 housing. And as soon as they give an MLP for wind, that the next thing that's going to happen is there'll be a lot of tax fraud. But we know that's not true. We know this is a differential imposed by the oil and gas industry to prevent the diversion of investments in oil and gas going to renewables. So there's a couple of those two key policy changes, and we need to expand the renewable portfolio. And Larry, if I could just have one more second. I'm looking at your map. You know, I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm real disappointed up there. Now, I went to our local Arkansas Electric Cooperative, and I asked to put in some wind there on Petit Jean Mountain. And then I wanted to put it in over the Ouachita National Forest. I thought I was going to get garroted before I got out from the forest director. She was going to kill me. Imagine putting in turbines in our beautiful forests, you know. So that didn't go. Petit Jean didn't go because the Arkansas Electric Cooperative really liked $2.80 a million BTU coal from Wyoming. 20-year contract, 5 cents a kilowatt hour wholesale, 8 cent retail, and that's what we like. Now, if you can bring it in under 4 cents, under that, we'll talk to you. At the time, I couldn't, so we didn't put any wind in. But Dan Poneman came through Arkansas about 3 years ago, and we had a meeting in the state capitol talking about energy. And he'd been up to look at shale, and he just stopped by to be nice. I was in town, and the first guy that asked a question was a guy from the Public Service Commission. And Public Service Commission said to Dan Poneman, who was Deputy Secretary of Energy, said, Mr. Secretary, he said, you're not going to make us put in like more renewables and stuff like that, are you? He said, you know, we're going to put a power line in from Oklahoma. We'll be getting renewables over there. We don't need it here in Arkansas. Now, this is our Public Service Commission. Now, he's not dumb. He knows he won't be on the Public Service Commission forever. But he knows where he can get a job after that. It's called, yes, Entergy. That's right. And they don't like renewable for whatever reason. So you get a lot of local politics in this business. But Larry, I want to thank you and AWEA for what you tried to do for community wind, because you can't always put in a 500 megawatt project even though you want to. And if you can get some of that wind in there, just like with residential solar, if you can distribute it, it's a good thing for the country.
When we did the 2008 20% by 2030 report that we talked about here, we talked about all three levels. Community wind stuff, where you can't get big wind, and New England's one of those places, for instance. Then the standard 100 to 400 megawatt projects, and then the gigawatt size projects, the stuff that you will be seeing maybe coming out of the Dakotas, eastern Montana, West Texas, the very large projects that will have very low cost. I mean, we just signed a project here in Colorado at less than $20 a megawatt hour. That's 2 cents a kilowatt hour. That's cheaper than any other generation source. So wind is right now economically competitive or better than other sources. So I'll turn to Michael. Michael does gas. Michael does wind. Talk to us about the wind-gas economic battle that you see currently and into the next decade, let's say, at utilities.
It's a very interesting situation because when I got into wind, because my career was before in gas mainly, and I thought it sounds like interesting thing, you know, very complementary, because wind is intermittent resource, and gas could, people use term firm the wind, in other words, make it power supply all the time. So I thought it would be very complementary. Unfortunately, it really didn't turn. People still talking about this. People talk about gas as being transition fuel to renewables. People talking about wind and gas are very complementary, but people don't. It doesn't work like this in the marketplace, because people that build gas plant look at the wind as a threat. It's not a complement; it's a threat, because as I mentioned yesterday, every kilowatt hour produced by something, it's not produced by something else. So really, you know, electric utilities that still, or co-ops or munis or whatever, they, you know, the problem with the wind is really does not fit well in most utility models, because it's on the ground, it's, you know, they're not used to deal with wind, they don't know how to do it, they really don't have the scale. So they like to build gas plants because they know they can do sort of one-stop shopping, you know, to buy gas turbine and so on. So I see there is a direct competition. You go to utilities, you know, you try to sell wind. The next question is, listen, you know, as General said, with $2 gas or $3.5 gas, you know, wind is more expensive, you know, in some places. Or still, they said, I need a base load resource. I really don't need an intermittent resource. So really, and trust me, I'm in the marketplace all the time. It's not working as a complementary resources. It's work as a completely two competitive supply resources. One is wind, another is gas. Now, obviously, what benefiting gas industry is a lower price of gas. And if gas would move up by another $1 or $2, we will see completely changed picture. I think even last winter, volatility of the gas started making people think a little bit differently about gas than they thinking today. Another one, just one more thing. I want to say that wind has, just like solar, it has tremendous feature. It's a fixed price power because you invest money up front. This is true infrastructure. You put, like you build a house or a bridge, you put money up front and you know what your cost is basically forever. And you know, gas is a highly volatile. But unfortunately, on a wholesale or even retail market, volatility is not priced. It's priced in the financial sector, where you know, if you want to get fixed rate mortgage or adjustable rate mortgage or fixed rate loan, there's a huge spread they call fixed versus variable rate spread. But electricity, because it's a pass to all of us consumers, they tell us to take this volatility, and really there is no premium for that volatility. In other words, or there is no discount sort of to that volatility. So there is this sort of abnormality of the market. I try to talk to the commissions, but obviously it's a different, you know, people just don't want to deal with this. So I think that's what it is. I think it's two competitive products, and they compete with each other every day.
Thank you. Can I just come in on this? Because I'm also an investment banker. I want to just follow up on what Michael said. You know, you can't, when you look at these projects, you have to look at the return on your investment. You can't invest in a gas-fired power plant and have it standing by for when the wind doesn't blow. I mean, you can't justify the investment, and that's the reason why it's competitive. You'd have to have a totally, you know, something made out of paper that cost less than a penny a kilowatt to have the standby. So that's why, even though it's great in theory, if you're going to invest $1 billion in a gigawatt gas-fired power plant, you've got to use it and get the return off of it. You can't just have that money sitting there.
But it's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, you know, sort of bring us back to sort of the central theme of the conference, which is how can we reduce carbon? How can we reduce the carbon intensity of our electricity sector? Because you know, as Susan talked about yesterday, the IPCC scientists have come back and said we have 15 years to take dramatic action to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So the good news is we have 15 years. The bad news is we have 15 years. That's not a lot of time. So, and I think we really need to focus on the role that utility-scale wind can play in addressing this challenge. The electricity sector produces 40% of our carbon emissions. The DOE Wind Vision, which will be released later this year, says that if we get to 20% wind by 2030, we can reduce carbon emissions from the electricity sector by about a quarter. So we're talking about 10% of our national carbon footprint being reduced by getting to 20% wind. And this is not pie in the sky crazy, like, oh gosh, can we possibly do this stuff? To get to 20% wind by 2030, you have to install 10,000 megawatts a year. Well, guess what? In 2012, the wind industry installed 13,000 megawatts. This year, we're going to install 14,000 megawatts. We can do 10,000 megawatts a year, no problem. So, yes, we have to address the market challenges. Yes, we have to address a variety of things. But central to all of this is going to be appropriately valuing carbon. Because if we really start addressing the social, environmental, and risk associated with carbon emissions and capture those negative externalities, it's going to create a much more level playing field for wind. And we have to be cautious. It's very attractive right now. Natural gas prices are low, as you say. Utilities, it's a known entity. They know what to do with gas plants. But if we go and build a bunch of natural gas plants today, we are locking ourselves into 30 or 40 or more years of a reduced carbon footprint, but not a no carbon footprint. And it's not going to bring the reduction in carbon emissions we need to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So we have to find a way to get these two, to get carbon-free sources of electricity to work with lower carbon sources, but we have to take action now to,
Okay, so
bring
Anna,
that down.
so you laid out the wind vision, 20% by 2030.
Yep.
Big reductions in water use, carbon dioxide, other pollutants, good
And
health
it'll save
benefits.
consumers money.
And at a lower cost.
Yeah.
So we've been doing, over the last 15 years, about 4 gigawatts a year. We have to ramp that up to 10 gigawatts a year. So what has to be different, Michael? What has to happen differently to go from 4 gigawatts a year to 10 gigawatts a year in the next 15 years, which is the imperative?
I look at it a little bit differently. I really don't look at renewables as an environmental play. I look at this as a business play. And when I started, and I appreciate what you say, but when you go and try to sell externalities, it's the most difficult thing to sell. You cannot sell. Nobody buys externalities. People buy real numbers, or they buy RPS. So I feel there are a number of factors. One, I think wind become competitive. Out of 10,000 megawatts of 14 that we're doing, probably nothing really done as an RPS fill. All of it is done as a lowest cost procurement for either utilities or some industrials. People like Walmart. We have contracts with Walmart. So it's pure economics. Okay. I think what helps obviously the PTC, the maintaining, PTC or some sort of other. I particularly not a big fan of PTCs. I'm more like RPS because it's more a direct target of how much renewables we have to have. But I think with wind, I think we're already. I mean, it will be up years and down years, but I think we're going there. What's important is the transmission, and because. But my worry is that if we have even transmission and we don't have appropriate policies, then people try to build transmission, for example, from Iowa to Tennessee, and everybody thinks that TVA just start buying wind. Like there is no. I mean, I think it's wishful thinking in some ways. I don't feel that TVA will buy a lot of wind unless there is an appropriate policy, because TVA would have to shut down their nuclear plants or coal they'll shut down anyway. So I think it's a combination of factors. 111D will play a role too, because there would be a lot of capacity or energy to be filled as a result of retirement of coal plants. But again, it's going to be competition between gas, because most utilities that retire their coal plants, or many of them, would want to replace it with gas. You read a lot of these conversions. The people said, "Oh, I convert coal plant to gas plant." It doesn't make any sense. Because it costs tremendous amount of money, and it's much more expensive than if they would fill this bucket with renewable resources, or maybe peaking plant or something else. But they really go unopposed. They just go to the commission. They build these plans to sort of convert coal plant to gas. It doesn't make any sense. So, but what I'm telling you is that, first of all, most and foremost, and I'm saying it's a policy. We have to have a policy. Our policy was production tax credits and PTCs. That's what was the wind policy as of right now. I think we need to continue with some sort of a policy, and I think things will happen.
Okay, so we're about out of time. I just want to, for those of you who are Coloradans and are really interested in wind in detail about wind in Colorado, we're having a Colorado Wind Conference at the University of Denver, October 1st. So put that on your calendars. We'd love to see you guys there, and we're going to be talking strictly about wind in Colorado, what policies, what technology changes, some of these benefits that Anna was talking about, and we're on our way to 20% wind. We have, as Anna said, 15 years. It's an economic play. But we hopefully it also will include the big projects, the intermediate projects, and the community projects, so that all, let all flowers bloom. Thank you for your attention, and let's thank our panelists.